Hello there and welcome to Art and Self. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator, the Curated Connections Library, and the Art Connection Circle. In this podcast, we experience the range and depth of what it means to be human, seen through our connections and conversations about intriguing works of art. These art conversations are here to show you that art is here for you as a catalyst, a challenger, a coach, and a comfort. If you love listening to these insightful conversations and you want to be a part of them, I would love to welcome you into the Art Connection Circle. You can get more information at artandself.com/circle, or just click the link in the show notes. Hello. Okay, so I have today for you on the podcast a part 2 to my discussion with Kate Wurtzel, who was on the podcast in episode number 117. And in that episode, we looked at Byzantium by Jenny Saville, and then afterwards, we realized we were looking at a cropped version, just a small bit off the bottom and the size, but it made a really big difference. So we decided to have a part 2 to our discussion, but you'll learn as soon as you start to listen that we end up just almost forgetting the artwork altogether for a while as we talked about all sorts of really deep and fun art-related things, like the concept of artist as genius, like what it's like to be on either side as an artist and as a viewer, all sorts of really fascinating topics. And I had such a delightful time talking with Kate for this interview. So, and before I get started, I want to remind you that the Art Connection Circle is open. So if you love having these deep conversations too about your life and about how your life in relationship to art, we would love to have you in the Art Connection Circle. You can register at artandself.com/circle. We have 2 cohorts going on this summer. One of them is starting on June the 15th, and the other one is starting July the 13th. I hope to see you there and get to spend a lot of quality time talking with you about art this summer. Again, artandself.com/circle. And here is my part 2 to my conversation with Kate Wurtzel about Byzantium by Jenny Saville. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Art and Self podcast. I am excited to welcome back Dr. Kate Wurtzel to the podcast. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
And as I said on our episode a few weeks ago or whenever it was, we realized after our discussion that we had been looking at a cropped version of the photo. And I personally realized too that did change some of my feelings about some of it, some of my interpretations. And we agreed that having a part 2 of our conversation might be beneficial.
Yes.
So if you are listening to this and you haven't listened to the first one, go back. It's episode number, I think, 117. Go back and listen to that episode and then come back and listen to this one. And then you'll learn all about Kate. Okay. So let's start. What do you think? What was your biggest moment of shock or surprise when you saw the uncropped version?
You know, I questioned about the movement of the figure holding the movement of the assumed male figure holding the female figure. And it really felt like he was kind of moving forward. In our last conversation, we touched on that a little bit. And like this one, because there's like a block at the bottom of his, I don't know, the area where he's supposedly standing or something existing, that block sort of roots him down a little bit more. It makes it heavier. I don't get as much forward acting movement from the image.
Yeah, that was exactly my feeling too. The one we had been looking at, it looked like he was moving forward. And so then I thought her movements were more of like the person's walking. And so there was like the natural sort of bouncing of her body, and that would be causing sort of the limbs and stuff to move around. But with him being so stuck to this podium, like not moving, it completely changes what I think about with her, like, and what's happening with her.
Right. So this to me is more like perhaps a capture of time rather than movement. So if he's more stationary, then the lines that we see that are sort of the pre-drawings of her legs, but look very intentional, maybe those are lines that are traces of movement in time before we arrive as the viewers. That's how I'm reading this.
Yeah.
But of course, there are multiple ways to interpret what's happening here.
Yeah, that's how I'm reading it too. It's like, it feels like instead of like, I think we both were talking about that it feels more, it didn't feel very like malicious, and we felt that it was a little bit more like loving, the relationship between the two. Like to me now, it almost feels more like she is flailing. And like and like he's grabbing her and she's like kicking and stuff. And it's such a different vibe for me. And I think it keeps changing. It's like, well, maybe I think that. And then I kind of change my mind. But that feels like the most true to me when I'm looking at it. It's interesting.
Right. It's almost like the artist gives us hints or gives us something to play with or to consider and think about in those extra lines that imply where her leg may have once been. But if you imagine, like, if the body were solid and we didn't have those extra lines, the difference between what that would feel like as the receiver of this image and the viewer on the image, I just feel like it would have a very different sensation of more weight and sort of stagnation if we didn't have those extra traces of where a leg once was.
Yeah. Yeah, it would just be sort of this limp body.
And I'm still truly amazed by her ability, the artist's ability to imply like a pressure and a gentle touch, or imply a touch by in those two spots where the contact is between the leg and the figure holding the leg, and then the contact with the limp arm, and then the figure holding the arm. Those two spots of contacts are really where the hyperrealism happens, and or at least more representation happens. And I'm just, as an artist, to move between that kind of detail to attention in your color palette, and then to move very fluidly to these open gestures, it's just kind of magnificent, to be honest.
Yeah, it really is. Like I guess it's our right, but it's his left hand, is you can see like the tension in the fingers. You can see like the give and take, like you can see it on her skin, but like you can see exactly like, yeah, I guess it's tension in the hand. And I'm sitting here thinking like, what did she do to make that happen? Because it still has like all those, like the coloring of it is not like realistic, and there's all those kind of expressive lines. So I guess it's just in the outline of the hand, but it just feels so real. I don't know.
And the points of contact between one body and the other feel very real as well to me.
Yeah.
So what were some of your thoughts when you first saw the extended version?
Yeah, my first thought was the movement is completely different. That was my biggest thing. And then my second thought too was, I think we had connected it to like a Pietà, and, the title is Byzantium, like that we had this sort of historical connection. And that connection to me was enhanced now that it like looks like it is a podium. And so it looks like it is more like sculpture, like at least he is more sculptural. I don't like the addition of her is kind of confusing me on that one, but like that connection was enhanced, especially with the podium.
And I think podium implies not just something being stationary, but also elevated.
Oh yeah.
Right. And we have a huge use of gold here, which also implies sort of elevation or royalty or some kind of refinement or special area. It's just a special quality to it, right? Usually when someone puts gold on things, it's like to accent or to imply a richness there. And so between the gold and the elevation of the podium, it just makes me consider like where this person is in society, or what where they're implied to be in society, why this figure is put on a pedestal outside of even the female body that he's holding.
Yeah. Yeah, and with the title being Byzantium, and what I know about Byzantine art was that it was mostly all about like glorifying God, and that's what the gold was. They wanted you to go into those churches and like see and like have the whole room be lit up with that gold so that you kind of experience like the awe of God. And so like her naming of it that and having it all gold makes me like, it gives it just a more like religious vibe. Is this then telling like some sort of religious story? Are these like people from the Bible or whatever being shown? I don't know the Bible well enough to like see if that is, but
neither do
I do know some, mostly from art history and my childhood reading. But then it also feels like one of the connections that I had noted, I remember from the first time, and I probably should have re-listened right before this because I'm like, oh, it's been a couple of weeks. I don't remember what I said yesterday versus what I said a few weeks ago. But I remember like thinking that he looked like Egyptian or something. Like he had this quality of like an Egyptian sculpture. And I actually I did a session at the National Art Education Association conference last weekend. And my session was experiencing art through the 5 facets of being. And so what I did is I put this artwork up, and then in groups around the room, each group interpreted through one of these facets. So there was a group that only looked at it through like an emotional lens. There was a group that looked at it through a physical lens, a mental, spiritual, and energetic. And it was really interesting. Like everybody had really different thoughts on it, connections that they hadn't made before. But the mental group, because they were kind of like looking at it through art history and stuff, like they had a lot of art history connections, and they thought of like, and didn't tell them the title, and they thought of like Constantine, like they thought it was more like Roman sculpture. Mm-hmm. But it was really fun to bring this to a whole group and to see everybody had really different reactions to it, and there were a lot of different interpretations in the room, especially depending on how they, which avenue they were tasked to look at it through, or which lens, I guess they were.
Were there any responses that surprised you in relation to the work?
What I really loved was this group had the physical facet. And so they were looking at like the bodies and like the movement and like imagining their bodies in the picture and like the really focusing on the physicality of it. And then even like the emotions, like we talked about in our episode, like the emotions of the artist and like how like imagining that, like her movements and things like that. But this one woman was like, she sees like she saw in this a strong like Eastern vibe, but then she thought about like how she does yoga. And so she was like, this artwork feels very like spiritual and religious. It feels there's some like there's an Eastern quality to it. And then she was like, I'm a white woman doing yoga in this Eastern tradition of movement. And she was like, and so there's some sort of she's like, I'm feeling some like kind of, I don't know, it was agitation or tension or something about like how those two things relating to each other. And it was really fascinating because I was like, this is an example right here of how like a person coming and looking at artwork is bringing all of who they are. And that is going to completely change their perception of the artwork. Right. I was like, no one in that room is going to make that same connection unless they are like really into yoga and they really practice all of that stuff. So I thought that was she didn't really have like an answer to it. She was just like, this is bringing up a lot of questions that I want to think about and I want to consider. And I was like, oh, that's what art's for. So that was kind of exciting to experience her. I wish we would have had another hour. We didn't have enough time. When 1 hour was just not enough with all those people with all of their thoughts. But that was the one that kind of stood out to me the most. But it was just a personal connection that she had made.
Yeah, I love that she wasn't finding answers, but she was provoked to think about more curiosities and questions.
Yeah.
Not just about the painting, but about her own practice, right? And where she lies within that position of Eastern and Western and her practice with her body, right? Yeah. We talked last time a little bit about the body and what embodiment is, like that presencing of mind. And that she brought it back to her body and breath practice and some of the cultural tensions she might feel within that she hadn't realized until being in front of this work of art. And it's just neat to hear. I'm glad you had that experience because it's really neat for me as sort of someone who wasn't in the room with you to be able to hear an alternative perspective, or not even just perspective, but an alternative response and what that response might include in terms of like the breadth of the response. It's not just about the artwork. It's not just about the artist's intentionality, but it's about her own relationship to the work as she received it. So that's really special.
Yeah. And it's something I personally have been like trying to explain my entire career. I remember in grad school, we had to do, I think it was in my museum education class, and we had to do like a philosophy of museum education. And we had to, I might man into a website. I don't know if we had to do it a website, but we had to do a philosophy of education. And I was trying to, I remember I made this little chart, and it was like, there was the viewer, and then there was an artwork, and there was the teacher, and then there was the other students, and there's all these lines kind of connecting. And I was like, there's something that's happening between the artwork and the person. There's something that's happening, like when you add the group of people, like there's all this stuff happening. I was like, but I don't know how to, I never knew what words to put around it. And even when I started art class curator, I've said it a million times, like if you were to like go back in all of my videos and podcasts and sessions, anything I've ever done, there's always this thing of like, there's this and there's something that I was like, but I don't know what it is. And then one day, like just in the last, I think it was in the last year, where suddenly I was like, it's energy, like it was just like this like mind, like aha moment that I'm like, oh yeah, it's energy. Like we're projecting our own energy forward. The artwork is projecting its own energy towards us. And like those two things are meeting in the middle. And that's going to look different. And then when you add a group of people, when you add like a classroom, or, even if it's just a small group of people all talking about the art, like suddenly like all of those energies are coming together and just like exponentially creating something really magical. So I have no idea where I started talking about that, but I was so excited to be able to like figure it out.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it fits perfectly. Also, like as an artist, people constantly ask me, what is this? What is this animal? And what is that animal? Or what is this world you're creating? And it's like, I don't always have the answers. So when you talk about energies, for me, it's about what I put into the work, but also what people get out of it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not always going to be a match. And that's totally fine. Like I'm absolutely accepting that it won't be for everybody. But if it is for somebody, that's when it's important to me, like to be able to spark those questions like your audience member had. Right.
Yeah.
Like if somebody were to go see my work and say, this really brings me back to my own body and makes me consider my movement practice, that would be a phenomenal response. And that is an adequate, absolutely beyond adequate response, So I don't know. I think from all perspectives, from the educator perspective, from the artist perspective, from the person interpreting, we do share this sort of inquiry, and it's like an energetic inquiry. And sometimes there's like a really good match of that, and sometimes it doesn't work. And I don't know, it's unpredictable, and that's kind of the beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, it makes me think, okay, I thought of like 5 things to say in response to that. I'm like, which one do I choose? It made me think of one, the painting that I bought from you. The minute I saw it, I was like, that's my painting. Like, I want that, like that. Like, I immediately felt that like instant connection to it.
Right.
I was very glad that it was available. And I love looking at it every day in my kitchen. Well, kitchen living area. It's like the room I spend all my time in. And so there was that, like, it was like this spark. But then I also had a woman in my program last fall, the Art Connection Circle. And she one day was like, okay. She was like, I went to the museum and there was an exhibit on Cezanne. And there were all these pictures of fruit. She was like, what am I missing? She was like, I don't feel anything towards it. And I was like, you don't have to feel anything towards it. Like it is not like every artwork is not made just for you and you're not broken if you don't get something from it. I was like, chances are you look at art enough, you're going to find one that like is that instant connection, is that like gasping moment, is that like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to see this. But like, it didn't happen for everyone. And I think there's this kind of misconception that all art is supposed to spark something in you. And that if it doesn't, then you're uneducated or you're flawed or you're not good enough or whatever it is.
Right. That there's something wrong in your translation of the work of art.
Yeah.
And a deficit of some sort if you don't have that reaction to it. But I also think, when you say that, it makes me think of sort of, I haven't attended a big blockbuster show in quite some time, but how we put expectations on our reactions to certain works of art that are pushed more in the mainstream, right? And so as a classroom educator, diverse representation is so important for so many reasons, and that would be a whole nother topic to dive into. But like, even on the most basic level, it's exposing people to the understanding that they don't have to be in alignment or appreciate everything that's just supposed to be culturally beautiful and accepted in that way. And so I think, that more exposure to different kinds of art in general can help you understand where your interests lie and actually evaluate that response in a more personal and subjective way, right? And it's unfortunate that person felt inadequate in that moment in her own reaction to the artwork, because it's truly not the case, right? She gets to decide. She gets to honor her own reactions.
Yeah. And I was like, it is just like any other art form. Like if it's any other, like if you're picking a book or you're picking a movie to watch or a television show to watch or music to listen to, like just because I don't like country music doesn't mean that country music is not good and really powerful for someone else. I was like, it's preference. There's a lot going on, and that like art is the same way. Like you're allowed to have preferences. You're allowed to be drawn to certain things. Like I've gotten to the point where it's like, if I go to a museum and there's like, I used to be like, I have to see it all, it's important that I see every single thing, that I'm good enough, I'm cultured enough to like do that. But now if I go to a museum and it's like a bunch of pots from someplace, I'm like, I think I'm okay to skip that. I'm like, I'm going to go to the contemporary section. Like that's all I really want to do right now. And so I'm like, I just allow myself to do that. But there was a time in my life where I was just like, I didn't allow that because I thought I had to be good enough, I think, for all of it. Life's too short to like
reinforces,
do that.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It also reinforces the idea that like, well, I think multiple interpretations is more accepted more broadly now, right? It kind of reinforces the idea of the artist as genius. And speaking of pedestals, and that that what the artist is trying to convey is the true essence or meaning of something. And that is problematic, right? Because then if we don't understand it or we don't have a reaction to it that, is at that level of comprehension, then when we do feel like there's something wrong with us, or like you said earlier, flawed. And so I don't know. I'm been thinking about sort of the artist not as genius and what that would look like recently.
Yeah, I love that. I do, because I had this, it's so true, because one, that was the story that was told through all of art history up until just, I guess, very recently. I think now it's maybe not told so much, but I'm thinking like, I think of, I guess like Andy Warhol was thought that way, like all the abstract expressionists, like all the way back to the Renaissance, like that was like the story. And I did a what is it called? Professional development session for a district back in December. And in the workshop, it was like I think it was 2 hours. And I chose one work of art and we spent the whole workshop with that work of art. They ended up having a blizzard and left. They had to leave in the middle of it because they were all sent home. But like, anyway, but I chose this work of art that was a contemporary work. I always get this title wrong, but it's The Anguish of Being and the Nothingness of the Universe, or something like that. That's the title, by Marcus Raya. And it's just the coolest work of art. It's in my book. So for those of you that are waiting patiently for my book, that you'll get to read about it. But so that was the work of art I chose, and it's amazing. Oh, it's on the podcast too. I'll try to remember to link to it. But anyway, so we were talking about this, and suddenly this woman raised her hand, or not raised her hand, it was on Zoom, but she was like, why did you pick this? I was like, why wouldn't I?
It's actually a really good question, right?
Yeah. I was like, why wouldn't I pick this? Like I think she thought, we should be looking at Monet or Van Gogh or, like a famous one. And I'm picking this like one she's never heard of that was done in the last 5 years. And I think it was I don't remember the exact day, but it was sometime in the last 10 years. And I mean, it is at a museum, like it's owned by one of the biggest museums, like the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. So it is like, It's not like I chose like some street artist, but even then, that's okay too.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a really interesting question. And I don't know if she liked my answer, but I was just like, what I did say was that, I like to question who decides what's famous and what's not, who decided, there was someone that made the decision that we need to focus on Monet when like there might have been other artists there that were just as revolutionary, just as talented that we're not thinking about. Like I can think of several artists of that time period that I'm like, oh, I'd much rather look at their work. But yeah, like those are past narratives that don't necessarily have my values of today. So yeah, it was fascinating.
I think in that moment, she probably also, and maybe not even consciously, but was calling into question, like, as we do artist as genius, there's also this, like, I know you're very familiar with this, but also like teacher as expert, right? Teacher as genius.
Yeah.
Learn from the class, teacher making choices, right? And so in some ways, I don't think she was trying to challenge your power, but also ask you, like, as the person leading us, why did you choose this, right? Because you are in that position to make these decisions. And I think that's a really important and intriguing question for you.
It is.
And for anybody, actually.
Yeah, I love that. Because I don't, now that you're saying this as genius thing, I'm like, oh, I don't like anybody being called that. Because it, like, I think one of my main like philosophies on life is that we are all like, we're on the same playing field, that no one of us is above the other one. We're all just like different. We all grew up with different circumstances, different, generational, ancestral traumas and socio-political like shit that like we're all doing the best we can with whatever we started with. And to think that like one person is like above it all, it just feels a little bit gross to me.
Well, I think it comes that way because the artist is perhaps doing something or tapping into something that maybe somebody else isn't, right? And so it feels separate. Plus, there's that idea that the artist has something in their mind that they're translating onto the canvas. And therefore, that translation then has to come across to somebody else. So it becomes this a play of meeting space, right?
Yeah.
And so all of those things kind of contribute culturally, I think, to the idea of artist as genius. But then if we start thinking about even teacher as like healer and artist as healer, and it becomes more of a collective action where in some ways the artist becomes sort of a vessel for the creating that then becomes healing. And in that way, that's the only way I'm thinking about how to decenter this notion of teacher as expert or artist as genius, is if we maybe reframe the way that we think about these positions culturally. I don't know. It's just a bit of thought that's been kind of sitting in my head.
I love
and
it.
You just gave me the platform to talk about it momentarily. That was not planned at all.
I know. I love it. Well, I love that artist as healer idea because one, that's kind of what I've been working on, like through like what I'm writing in my book is like how the art has healed me. And then through the programs I'm doing, like it is very healing, but also like I have found in the last year, both the creation of art and the writing process, that I am being healed through those actions. So not only is the artist a healer of others, but the artist is healing themselves through the art process. And so it's just both. And then as the artist is healing themselves through their process, then that energetic connection is like they're seeing each other's humanity and their sameness and they're like the things that they both deal with and like
the humanness or just that connection, I should say, not even just isolating it to humans because there's more than human too. But
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the progression of my first year as a professor, right? And each one of the paintings I created during those seasons of my transition into becoming a professor were me traveling through some very tough emotions. And the piece that you got is love. I mean, that's the name of it. So,
I didn't even know it had a name.
It's like the coming out of the chaos of the muddiness of transitioning from a graduate student to a professor for me. But that's what it was for me in the making of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's for you in your kitchen, right? It's taking on its own layers of meaning. And story and narrative is building as it becomes yours. Yeah. So I don't know.
But no,
I don't.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say,
excited.
I don't really think that I'm like you. I'm not saying necessarily that artist is automatically healer, but I definitely think that when you come to the creative space and you show up for yourself in a healing way, that only allows you to open up to others and to be in a space of healing with, right? I'm not bringing some sort of medicine to you. I'm in the process of healing with you collectively. And that's a very different kind of experience, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's like, I'm not trying to heal you through my painting. That is going to project a completely different energy.
Right. So, but I agree with you, like the making of and the doing of and the showing up to that space constantly, even when it's difficult, is part of the process. And in some ways it allows, at least in my opinion, it allows, if I can open up to that process, then I can open up to others' interpretations of it and what they are experiencing themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that transitions me to a question I've been wanting to ask. But also, I love to hear the story about that painting, because like that like moment of what you're saying in your career was like, is really applicable to what I was going through at the time when I saw it. Like I had been going through this hard place, and I got to a place of like really kind of understanding and knowing what I want to do. And it was like that really is like very synchronous. But my next question is, some of the things I always worry, and I know we've kind of completely gone off the painting, but it is all related, is I always wonder this, and I get questioned about this from, teachers that I work with throughout the years, but that some teachers question the idea that we are allowed to interpret an artist's work, that we shouldn't be allowed to put ourselves into whatever we're seeing, that we need to respect whatever the artist thought and was feeling in that moment. Like, you're making great facial expressions. You say, like, you got this like moment on your face.
Not to just bleh.
Like, please bleh. I want to hear all of it.
I feel like this is all my master's thesis work. Yeah, I have wild interpretations. I mean, wild things to say about that. But, I sit on all ends of it, right? Artist, I am educator. I am person who looks at images every day and receives them. I am mother, which also affects how I view things. All of the above, right? So many things in this world are never neutral and never can be neutral by where they exist in time and space, right? Like there's being neutral in your viewing of an image is impossible. It's an impossibility, in my opinion. So sure, you can attempt it. You can think that you're being respectful of the artist, but in doing so, you're distancing yourself from your own reaction, and you're not honoring, you're not listening, you're not, it's devaluing your own response and your own opinion. And again, putting the artist as central, right?
As you're talking, I'm like, oh, his artist is genius again. That's what it is.
And it's not to say, though, like I understand that argument. I do understand that argument, but it's by honoring your own interpretation, it doesn't mean you're invalidating somebody else's intention.
Yes. I'm not saying my interpretation of this is what is true and what is happening, what is is the right answer. It's just there is not a single right answer, that there are many right answers at the same time.
And this is so applicable to life. And I think one of the things that we did in our previous session is sort of relate what we were seeing to our life practices, right? I'm not going to, for me, and I'm not dictating this for others, but I'm not going to walk around thinking that my interpretation of life is absolute truth. I don't believe in that, period, first of all, as absolutisms, but as absolute truth. And so I'm going to have space set aside in my thinking and in my feelings for other people's positions. And I'm going to authentically attempt to listen in a genuine way. Like when I don't have conflicts often with students, but I'm just thinking like, you have a conflict with a student, right? For me, the space of being a teacher and the space of being an artist and the space of being all those things, even a mother, is the space of really genuinely listening. And before responding, right? So I don't know. I think there's a way to balance both. I think there's a way to honor yourself and honor the artist in a shared space, and not one that is a binary or an either or a compartmentalization.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
That was a lot of words.
Yeah, it was awesome. Love a lot of words. Yeah, but I think it too gets really tricky when the works are like from other cultures than you or races than you or whatever, because that's when I get it the most.
Okay.
Like I got it but I get it on everything. Like, no, we shouldn't interpret art at all. But I had put up Frida Kahlo's Two Fridas once. And to me, one of my chapters of the book is Two Fridas because I can relate to it so much, like as a woman and as a person, like it is so like applicable about like how to be with yourself in pain and how to be like both whole and like feel shame and like all this stuff. Like there's so much in there about being a woman and like her infertility and like there's so many, her marriage, like all of those things. And like that had a woman who was like, no, because this is a culturally rooted artwork, like we can only see what Frida was projecting onto her canvas. And I was like, oh, but I was like, oh, like there's so much richness to be found here and so much connection and so much learning that I can do about myself. And all of that can happen. I can have all those thoughts and feelings and I can learn so much about myself and I can heal myself as Frida's healing herself. And still, Frida's voice can be heard and we can still see her story and we can still celebrate what she created. Like it can all be true. It can all be
right. I mean,
at the same time.
The concern is very real, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to do an injustice to somebody else by privileging your own perspective. And you don't want to lose the cultural context and the meaning. So when you say it like that about being from another culture or being a product of another culture or something like that, I understand that concern. But again, I think you and I are speaking kind of the similar language and in alignment. You can culturally appreciate without appropriating, but you can also like hold space for both your own reaction and a cultural investigation. It doesn't have like you said, it's it's not an either or.
Yeah.
And those little words, more and more in my own work and in my writing and in my thinking, those little words of and, with, from, in are making more of a difference to me. Like when we are with something, when we are in conversation with someone or something, right? There's a withness, an andness, and that's just so different from feeling it as an either or.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this artwork that was in Atlanta in an exhibit I saw a couple of years ago, and can't find it online anywhere. It's because it's a video, and so you can see clips of it, but you can't see the full thing. I've searched high and low trying to find it, but it's called The Hikers by Rashid Johnson. And it was like a 7-minute video, and it was a ballet. And it was like this Black man with this sort of canvas mask on, and it was completely covering his face. But it had these sort of drawings on it that were almost looked like they could be African influenced, but they almost looked kind of Basquiat style. It was very expressive, like black lines drawn on this canvas. And he was doing this ballet in this like forest, basically. And then you see another man, they're dressed the same, but you can tell they're different men. Like they're slightly different builds and things. They're dressed the same. They still have the mask on, dancing too. And then there become a place where they found each other. Like they were all alone. And then they found each other. And it was like this, like you could like this, the way that they were dancing and meeting and like, it was just this like swell of like being seen and like, and then they took off their masks for a minute and like looked at each other and then they put their masks back and then they danced away from each other or whatever. But it was like, I watched it like 3 times in a row. I was like, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. But at the moment I was like, I could feel like, oh, I've been there before where I haven't felt seen. And then suddenly I was seen for a minute. But at the same time, I'm seeing, oh, like this is clearly about like 2 Black people who feel so alone and unseen, and then they find each other and they find their people. And I was like, and that's what the label text said or whatever. And I was like, it was so beautiful at the same time to like know and feel like to recognize that feeling and then to see it in another person. Like it helped me, like my humanity and my connection to the emotions of it helped me understand the artist better and like what the art was about. So like it got to be both. It got to be the story of a really important issue in our world, and like from a really emotional human place. And then I got to experience the emotions of it, recognize them and have felt them, and then see them in another person. So it was like, oh, it was one of the most powerful things. I don't even know. I'm like, oh, I want to watch it again so bad, but I don't know where I could see it. Like I would just watch it every day.
I think you're talking about like a really powerful experience where you felt that connection through emotion, right? Yeah. And you might not have had the same cultural experience, right, as a white woman, but some of the anxiety, some of the loneliness, some of the tension and complication that you felt from the piece resonated with you. And so you can stand with, right, in front of that work. And it doesn't mean it's identical. It doesn't mean you're claiming that your story is the same as their story. It just means you're claiming this sort of space of understanding, this depth of emotion.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard you say with like I'm making art about witness. I think you said on social media, and I was like, what does that mean? And I was like, I see you say with, and then you've mentioned it a few times. I'm like, I need to think about with more, because I think that's really powerful. Like being with the art, but also being with other people. Like it just changes things.
I think about it a lot as I'm painting, also as I'm teaching.
Yeah.
And so that sort of line of thought comes through for me, not just in making art, like I often say, like, I'm co-creating with my materials, right?
Right.
They're speaking through me. Sometimes I feel like a vessel more than an artist. I feel like a transporter of this sort of connectivity. But I also think about that in teaching, and I think it's really important at any level, whether it's when I used to teach elementary kids or now college kids.
Yeah, because that's a completely different thing. It's like I'm teaching two kids. That implies like I've got something that I have to give to you, but really like we're together when used with, like we're learning together. We're like it's powerful.
Yeah, Deleuze, who's the French philosopher that I like to quote a lot, it's kind of stuck in my brain from my dissertation. He has this idea of doing with, right? That the people that in one of his books, I can't quite recall which one, but that the people that we learn the most from and the moments that we learn the most are when we're doing with others. So like, I'm not going to be the instructor who stands and just models. I'm going to actively participate with you in the creating and the making. And I mean, he doesn't say all that, but he says he does very heavily promote the idea of doing with. And so I interpret that in my own way, for as an educator.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay. All right. We have not talked about this painting for like 30 minutes. I'm not mad about that. I'm loving this conversation. Okay. But going back to the painting, is there do you feel like there's anything that like you feel you wanted to address that maybe we haven't covered?
I just really appreciate the artist style. I just really want to say that out loud. It's super generative. It's very thought-provoking. Since then, I've looked at some of her other work and really appreciate her other work as well. Yeah, and it's got qualities that are sort of organic and not organic, and there's just a really beautiful balance here. And compositionally, it's gorgeous as well.
Yeah, I love it.
I know those are more like surface level aesthetic things, but I think they're important to recognize too. Like, it's just great.
Yeah. And it's funny because, last time we talked, I was like, I'm going to make a painting soon. I'm getting ready.
And I was going to ask you if you made it.
I did. I made a painting. Yay! And I did. I haven't shared it with anybody yet. Just a couple people, like so personally, but not like out there in the world. And in my head, I'm like, I want to paint like this. I'm like, I want to paint like Kate, like really energetic. And I want to paint like Jenny Seville and I get to the thing and I'm like, whoa, I don't paint like that. I learned almost immediately that it didn't feel right in my body to paint like that. And so mine is not like that. But it was fun. Like in my head, I'm like, this is how I want to paint. Like it's so expressive and amazing. And then I get to it and it's like, oh, no, that's not how you paint.
Your body told you otherwise.
Yeah, I was like, no, it needs to be smoother. It needs to be, like it needs to have a little bit more edge. It needs to be, like that line that we talked about in our last episode, like that brown line that's on there, like that needs to be smoothed out. Like it doesn't need to have that, dry brush thing. Like
it's hard to leave marks that we think look like mistakes.
I know.
That brown line could have been a mistake. That brown triangle shape underneath the line could have been viewed as a mistake. I get it. It's so hard. But then like sometimes when I smooth something out or I make it look not so like, I don't know, not have so much contrast to the rest of the work, sometimes I miss the roughness of it. Yeah. It's like, oh wait, now it's too pretty. It's too nice. Like where did that really action imbued gesture go? Where did that mark go? Oh, it got lost under everything else. And like, it's totally life, right? Like we have a disruption and then we just go back to normal. We try to smooth it out again.
Oh, true. Yeah, I love how you can connect everything to life. But I'm still, it was my first one. And I'm like, in my head, like I do have, and so my book, each chapter is a different work of art. And there is I think it's chapter 14, that's going to be my art, so I'm getting ready, like 14, like I think I'm writing 12 right now and 13's already written. So I'm like, I'm real close. And I'm like, okay, I got to make a painting for it. Right. Cause of course I have to make a painting. And then I realized after I made the painting, which I do love the painting, it somehow ended up with a tiger on it. I mean, it was weird. I don't even know how it happened, but I love it. But I realized that no, it's about like the whole process of like making my art journal and how every page was a different experiment. And I tried all the different things. And at the same time I'm writing this book, I'm also creating this other book of just image after image in my art journal. I was like, that's really the story. So I think I need to create another 20 paintings before I really know what kind of painter I am. I think one painting is not gonna. Yeah. It's not gonna.
Well, this is your process, right? Yeah. This is you figuring this out, and there doesn't have to be an endpoint.
Yeah. Right.
That's what I was going to say. Like when you tell yourself, I have to make a painting for a book chapter, like, no, girl, that's a lot of pressure. Yeah. That's a lot of pressure you put on yourself.
Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm going to focus on the process. I'm only going to follow my intuition. And then I got to one part where I was like, my intuition's not telling me anything else. What do I do next? I don't even know.
Break.
My intuition actually was telling me that it was done, but my logic mind was like, no, it's not done. And then finally I was like, oh, I'm not listening to my intuition. My intuition tells me it's done. It's just in my logic, I'm like, it might be a little not balanced enough. But I'm like, I actually think it is. I don't know. It's a whole thing. Eventually I'll share it when I feel brave enough to.
Okay. No pressure. You don't even have to. You can keep it tucked away. Or you can share the next one or the next one.
Right. Yeah. I didn't start sharing my art journal pages until I had done many, and I kind of felt a little bit more comfortable doing it. So I have already started painting number 2.
Oh, we put so much pressure on ourselves to be good at something. And it's just, it's ridiculous. We have to allow ourselves to kind of just mess it up and muck it up every once in a while,
Yep.
Get your hands dirty and your feet dirty. I was going to ask you, what did you paint with? Was it paintbrush or was it your toes? Was it your fingers? Was it your nose?
It was paintbrushes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I did have, there's some collage on it too.
Okay.
Yeah, I teared up a old copy of Jane Eyre and used that as some of the lines. So they're
nice
text. My favorite book. So.
One time I grabbed a mop from the garage and started painting with that. And then I took an ab roller from my husband's side of the garage, which is mostly workout equipment. And I rolled the ab roller on the canvas and paint. And he was not happy with me.
Wash off, kind of.
Whatever. Use whatever. Just experiment and have fun. Anyhow, I think Jenny Seville is beyond experimenting and having fun, but there is an engagement there that is very open and gestural. And so I love that energy that she brings to the work.
I do too. Same.
This was fun.
This was super fun.
I have to go pick up my children soon from school.
Yeah, we've been talking an hour now. Time to stop. Thank you so much for coming back. And I know we got to say our little piece about how the movement's different and then have an entire other conversation that was fabulous as well. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Talk to you later.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. It was super fun.
Thank you so much for listening to Art and Self. And if you loved what you heard and you want to be a part of these exciting conversations about art, I would love to invite you to join the Art Connection Circle. In the Art Connection Circle, we get together in an intimate small group and have deep, conversations about works of art centered around our own self-development, our own personal experience, and what we bring to the conversation, just like we do in these art conversations on the podcast. You can find more information out about this program at artandself.com/circle, or you can click the link in the show notes. You can also find links to the artworks that we discussed over on the show notes, and then you can also find me on Instagram and on Facebook. Just search for Cindy Ingram Art and Self. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.